We're talking today to Frank Poulos, who is the Executive Chairman of Magnis Energy Technology, ASX code MNS. Now, Frank, you've just had some significant announcements this week, one of which you announced some funding from two significant investors of $20 million, one of which was from John Hancock, who's the son of Gina Reinhardt, of course. Now, Hancock's been very successful as an early investor in Vulcan. What attracted him and your other funding partner to Magnis?
Thanks, Tim. It was pretty much on the back of our New York project. I think that was a main draw card for these investors to come into Magnis itself. They were quite surprised how near-term production, or how close we were to near-term production out of our New York lithium-ion battery plant. And so, yeah, in short, it was all around a New York battery plant that brought these investors in. And it's great to have local New York based investors in who are getting behind a New York project. And one of the reasons we also chose both of those groups, it was purely because apart from the option that was put forward to us, which we thought was attractive, these groups can also open a lot of doors for us in the investment community in New York as well. So that was another big draw card for us.
Frank, now as part of that $20 million investment, you announced to the ASX you're investing $13 million into your New York battery gigafactory. Can you tell us about can you explain the ownership structure in that battery factory that you own and how you'll realise value from that asset moving forward?
So when it comes to the battery plant, pretty much, well, Magnis is the major shareholder of it. C4V, the technology provider, is also a large shareholder, and between Magnis and C4V, there's roughly about 95% ownership between the two parties. Then there's a couple of minority shareholders in the project, one being Riverstone Capital, who provided us with the debt piece. And then you've got a group that provides cathode materials in Primate Precision Materials, and C&D Assembly, who provides battery management systems out of New York as well. So that's the ownership structure. In regards to the board's thoughts in this last investment, that came on the back of, we believe, and answering the second part of your question, we're looking at a listing in the US, in New York. We think that's where we'll get the greatest valuation for the actual company itself. Secondly, we also think it will help us with our growth plans. We want to scale up to double-digit gigawatt-hour production, and we think by listing in the US, that gives us the best chance. So from a Magnis point of view and from where the board was coming from, we thought this was actually an opportunity to increase our stake in IM3 New York prior to any listing, and that would be advantageous to our shareholders going forward.
Frank, post that funding announcement, you've also announced today that you've provided an update on your activities inside the battery plant, and you've also announced total binding sales agreements now of a little below $1 billion Australian dollars. When do you kind of get into near-term production, and when do these sales agreements turn into revenues?
Yeah, Tim. So with the update, as a lot of your listeners may have seen, it was an update to show that our production in New York is getting closer. Total construction is now at 17.85% complete. We also announced those contracts, as you mentioned, and with those contracts, they kick in next year. The market is very tight at the moment. So if we're able to get our production happening sooner, we've got no issues. And from the binding off-takers, that they would take ourselves early as well. So it's up to us to make sure we meet our time frames to get into production as soon as possible, and then we'll start bringing those revenues in. At the end of this year, Once we get to that semi-autonomous scale, that's when we start hitting, semi-serious production numbers. And by about March or April of next year, we start getting fully automated production happening. And as the year goes on, we will start hitting gigawatt hour scale. So which is really serious in the marketplace. But as I mentioned before, with some of the funding opportunities we're looking at from listings and so on, the aim is to scale up very quickly. And I think we mentioned on our last interview as well, we are speaking to groups in the US, government groups, in regards to funding there as well, to help us grow exponentially. And that's the aim from our side. But it's actually getting really exciting. And by the end of this year, we'll have that semi-automated production.
Frank, of course, that today's announcement was a government contract, a 74 million US government contract. For investors, can you give us more details on the applications of your batteries and your cells, and how they're used and who can use them?
So in regards to the main industries around lithium-ion batteries or cells, you pretty much have the energy stationary storage market. You also have the EV or sort of transportation market as well. Regards to the contracts that we have to date, the majority of those are in the energy stationary storage side of things, and that also includes today's one and some of the others that we've spoken about previously. In saying that, we are in discussions with some large household names, groups who are in the EV space, and also quite large groups in the energy storage space, whether it's home batteries or batteries for large buildings or for grid applications. We're working hard to secure those. We've been going through qualification processes, and the way it works normally, in order to get these agreements like the ones we've announced today, you usually go through a testing phase or a qualification phase that at times goes for 2 years. It may go for even longer. So we are working with a number of groups. You could see also the attraction where we've got a non-China battery supply chain, and you're producing these things in the US. So obviously, key targets will be these US-based companies who are looking at local supply, and we're one of those few that can supply it, and even rarer with a non-China supply chain as well.
Frank, I was talking to our EV battery analyst the other day, and what I underestimated was what a significant player China is in the EV supply chain. And that is something that the US sees as potentially a security risk. Can you talk to the significance of the US wanting to own their battery chain, and what that means for potential government funding for Magnis?
Look, they are the leader by far, and there's no doubt about it. And we've seen Europe, for instance, there's a number of plants that are being built. I think the last count was sort of around 50 that are being built, and the US have fallen behind in this space. We've seen and we've discussed previously, President Biden's infrastructure bill and roughly 20 billion set aside for cell manufacturers. The government sees the need and the importance of it, and hence why IM3 New York is winning contracts like today's announcement, where we've secured another government contract. It is really important. The supply chain is utterly important to make sure it's secure, and there's sort of that independence from China. So that's something that we see as being a huge advantage for us in moving forward, especially with these government contracts, but also working with some of these groups out of the US, whether it's EV makers or large household names who are looking at security around their cell supply going forward.